During the 1920s, the US economy expanded rapidly, and the nation's total wealth more than doubled between 1920 and 1929. The stock market was placed at the center of New York in Wall Street, where from millionaires to janitors poured their savings into stocks. As a result of this, the stock market underwent rapid expansion, reaching its peak in August of 1929. At this moment, the production had already decreased and the unemployment had risen, higherly price of the stock prices. Also, consumers' debt was proliferating and the agriculture sector was struggling due to the falling price of the food. Adding to this that the banks had a lot of loans that could not be liquidated. During the summer of 1929, the US economy entered into a mild recession. Consumers stopped consuming and the different products started to pile up. Also, the stock prices continued rising, reaching stratospheric levels that could not be justified by expected earnings. In October of 1929, there were a lot of investors that began selling overpriced shares in mass. The stock market crash that some had feared happened at last. A record 12.9 million shares were traded that day, known as Black Thursday. 5 days later, on October 29, the Black Tuesday, some 16 million shares were traded after another wave of panic swept Wall Street. Millions of shares ended up worthless, and those investors who had bought stocks on margin were wiped out completely. As consumer confidence vanished in the wake of the stock market crash, the downturn in spending and investment led factories and other business to slow down production and begin firing their workers. Many Americans forced to buy on credit fell into debt, and the number of foreclosures and repossessions climbed steadily. The global adherence to the gold standard, which joined countries around the world in a fixed currency exchange, helped spread economic woes from the United States throughout the world, especially Europe.
The Great Depression was the worst economic downturn in the history of the industrialized world, lasting from 1929 to 1939. It began after the stock market crash of October 1929, which sent Wall Street into a panic and wiped out millions of investors. Over the next several years, consumer spendings and investment dropped, causing step declines in industrial output and employment as falling companies laid off workers. By 1933, when the Great Depression reached its lowest point, some 15 million Americans were unemployed and nearly half of the country's banks have failed.
Somehow it didn't last forever. The time came when the ticker tape in the broker's office told a new story. It was panic. 16.5 million shares of stock sold in a single day. Sold hopelessly, desperately, at any price.
We can highlight events and characteristics like the stock market crash of October 1929, the most catastrophic stock market crash in the history of USA, also the Black Thursday, the Hoover administration, Smoot-Hawley Traffic Act, That was a law passed in the United States on June 17 in 1930 to counter the effects of the Great Depression. The Dust Bowl, that was the name given to the drought-stricken southern Plains regions in the United States, which suffered several dust storms during a dry period in the 1930s. The food riots that broke out in Minneapolis, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt launched the New Deal, the first big step to solve the effects of the Great Depression.
The US economy expanded rapidly in the 1920s. This period was famously dubbed as the Roaring Twenties. Many people saved their money in the stock market, which made those stocks grow at an absurdly fast rate, and people, including the likes of janitors and millionaires, inverted in the stock market. But there was a huge unemployment. Production in factories was declining. There was a huge debt named the consumer's debt, and as the years went by, it was rising a lot. The agricultural sector wasn't producing a lot of money due to the weather conditions, and this period is famously known as the Dust Bowl, which was a drought that damaged the agricultural landscape. Hence, there wasn't a lot of income coming from the fields. Then, in October 18, 1929, the stock market began to fall, and several days later, in October 24, approximately 13 million shares were traded to stabilize the market. But then, in October 29, there were 16 million shares traded, but the stock prices fell down to the ground, and in that process, billions of dollars were lost.
The Great Depression brought countless consequences to society. This episode influenced the social, political, and economic areas. In the economical part, the effects were numerous. The banks were not able to provide savings for the people, making companies to fall apart and also forcing some of these companies to close. Consumerism decreased, meaning a decrease in the monetary circulation. And basically, all these episodes left a great part of the society in a really poor conditions after this economical crisis. The social and political sectors were also affected. On one hand, unemployment increased to critical levels because there were not enough wages for people, and for the ones that had jobs, this was really reduced. From another hand, the middle classes became poorer, causing inequality and a big social polarization.
Many are beyond joking. A report from Detroit says men are sitting in the parks all day long, out of work, muttering to themselves. Some succumb to apathy. Some are swept by alarm, and bank after bank across the country is hit by panic withdrawals. New lines appear on American streets, depositors swarming to snatch out what savings they have left before it's too late. Banks by the hundreds, by the thousands are forced to close. On the eve of the presidential election of 1932, the whole financial system quakes and totters.
In terms of politics, the liberal democracies were questioned from ideological to political aspects, and also new political ideologies were imposed in different countries because of this economical crisis. Because of these consequences, Franklin D. Roosevelt launched the New Deal policy to stop the economic crisis. Its goal was relief, recovery, and reform for those who were more affected.
Today, the closest event that can be comparable to the Great Depression is the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008, which is considered the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Essentially, it was a severe contraction of liquidity in global financial markets that originated in the United States as the result of the collapse of the US housing market. It threatened to destroy the international financial system, caused the failure or near failure of several major investments and commercial banks, such as the Lehman Brothers, which was the nation's fourth largest investment bank. Also, mortgage lenders, insurance companies, and saving and loan associations. Now, the consequences for this, at least in the short term, were devastating. Just in the United States, the stock market plummeted, wiping out $8 trillion in value between 2007 and 2009. Unemployment climbed, peaking at 10% in October of 2009. And essentially, Americans lost $9.8 trillion in wealth just as their home values plummeted, and their retirement accounts vaporized.
Apple's up more than 6% right now. Google about 3%, but Dell, Intel, Research Motion, and Microsoft are all to the upside. Look how strong.
Did not disappoint. 400 points higher. Yes, indeed. The markets roar higher last 30 minutes of trading as volatility once again rules the day.
Most of the techs this morning, if not all of them, have just exploded to the down 1.7% here, a loss of 37 points or so. Apple shares are just getting hammered this morning.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets. Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate. We're red everywhere, essentially, down by 4-5%.
We're down over 16%. Dow at the same time has fallen about 18%.
The stock market is now down 21%.
Because we're now down 43%.
What in the world is happening on Wall Street?
Two-year note yields went from 190 to 166 in the blink of an eye.
On the NASDAQ, everything and more has been completely wiped out.
It was the worst day on Wall Street since the crash of 1987.
From the financial capital of the world, the opening bell is going to ring in 5 seconds, and to be honest with you, we wish it wouldn't.
Traders here working the phone say a lot of their customers are freaked out, waiting to see how low the Dow will go. They're focused on the Dow, not so focused on OPEC. Yes, OPEC did cut production by 1.5 million barrels per day.
Really, you're seeing just broad-based declines across all of the major technology sectors. Apple's under pressure, Yahoo down 8.5%, Cisco 6.5%, Research in Motion 10%.
And we're not getting the bid wanted. We're not getting the stop trading, and we see where the buyers are. We're just, every day they're pounding it.
The heightened financial turmoil that we have experienced of late may well lengthen the period of weak economic performance and further increase the risk to growth.
Can't look at it after you buy it because it's so horrible.
But we've had an 8-day losing streak in the Dow that in percentage terms puts it on par, close to the loss suffered in that crash in 1987, close to that percentage loss those 2 days in 1929.
What started in America last year has now spread to every part of the world.
Today, the US economy has largely recovered. In late August, the US stock market set a record for the longest running upswing in its history, replenishing the retirement accounts of workers who stayed invested through bouts of volatility. Home prices have also rebounded, pushing total housing wealth to top levels, seen in pre-recession peak. Unemployment is also at low at 3.9% by July 2018. Even though it was safe to say that the economy has largely recovered, it has not quite helped all consumers equally. Many workers have struggled to land jobs that paid as well as the position as they had before the recession. That shift, combined with the time spent out of work and other drops in productivity since the crisis, has led to a loss of about $70,000 in lifetime income for every American, according to an estimate from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. By the end of 2017, 4.4 million homeowners were underwater under mortgage, meaning they owed more than their homes were worth, according to the real estate company of Zillow.